I want to be able to depict in music a glass of beer so accurately that every listener can tell whether it is a lager or a pilsner. Among the many great composers who've written for the symphony orchestra, none have surpassed Richard Strauss's sheer gift for specific and stunningly evocative sonic description. This ability reflected a dichotomous response to his upbringing in a musical family. He received a rigorous, highly traditional musical education from his father Franz, a virtuoso horn player, conductor, and composer. As the son of the Munich court opera's principal hornist, Richard was regularly exposed to orchestral playing at the highest level. While Franz despised Wagner and his music, his son's musical precocity inevitably led him to see Wagner's art as an embodiment of rebellion. Thus, by the time the younger Strauss began his professional career in 1885 at the age of 21 as an assistant conductor of the Meiningen Court Orchestra in central Germany, he was pursuing a style of composition that reflected the aesthetic values of the so-called New German School, linking music with ideas and personalities to create a new type of musical prose and the forms necessary to meet its demands. The result was a string of 15 masterly tone poems, beginning in 1886 with Aus Italien and ending with an Alpine symphony almost 30 years later. The surprising suitability of Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophical novel Also Sprach Zarathustra as the basis for a tone poem isn't solely a reflection of Strauss's unique abilities as a musical poet. The book's plot is simple. At the age of 30, the ancient Persian prophet and ethical philosopher Zarathustra leaves his lakeside home and retreats to a mountaintop, where he lives alone for 10 years, contemplating the meaning of life and the perils of the human condition. One morning he awakens, turns towards the sun, and cries out, "O great star, what would your happiness be if you did not have us to shine for? Like the bee that has gathered too much honey, I am weary of my wisdom. I need hands outstretched to take it from me. I wish to spread and bestow it, until the wise have once more become joyous in their folly, and the poor happy in their riches." Zarathustra then descends from the mountaintop to proclaim his new gospel to the people. With this plot structure in place, Nietzsche lays out his philosophical thesis in some 80 discourses, with titles such as Of Virtue, of War, and Of Science, each essay ending with the phrase, "Thus spoke Zarathustra." To the extent that the novel contains a broader narrative, it may be seen as a Bildungsroman, a novel of individual transformation in which a character undertakes a spiritual journey. Within this context, Nietzsche expounds upon some of his most well-known ideas. He asserts that organized religion is a human construction. If God is functionally dead, we are forced to take responsibility for our own fate. If our enlightenment is stifled by blind obeisance to conventional morals and values, we can ascend to a higher level of fulfillment, to the status of an Übermensch, by casting aside artificially constructed illusions and engaging with reality more directly. We can come to terms with our existential vulnerability and enable ourselves to accept what Nietzsche posited as the eternal recurrence of our existence. Although popular perceptions of Nietzsche have been conditioned by the monstrous distortions of the philosopher's writings that informed European fascism during the first half of the 20th century, an understanding of his appeal to Strauss requires a deeper acquaintance with his work. By the time the composer wrote his Also Sprach Zarathustra in 1896, the author had already been living in an asylum for 7 years, and was largely unaware of the extent to which his previously obscure works had suddenly achieved notoriety. Strauss was immediately engaged by the wit and liveliness of Nietzsche's writing, and was gratified by his critique of religion. Moreover, as a progressively minded artist who'd spent the previous 10 years battling uncomprehending critics, musicians, and listeners, the philosopher's notion that such impediments were an inevitable consequence of existence as an enlightened being appealed to Strauss's essential arrogance. To craft a narrative for his tone poem, he selected the prologue and 8 chapters from Nietzsche's novel to create a musical representation of the journey to enlightenment laid out in the book. Within this programmatic structure, Strauss used chords built on the notes C and B as Wagnerian leitmotifs to illustrate the struggle for transcendence. The key of C major, outlined in a 3-note motive at the beginning of the piece as part of a depiction of the sunrise Stanley Kubrick would make iconic in his film 2001, A Space Odyssey, symbolizes nature in all its immutable force and grandeur. In contrast, B major and B minor chords signify the changeable essence of the human psyche as it faces the challenges of existence in the natural world. These chords built on the note B are ubiquitous in sections such as those titled "Of Those in the Background World," "Of Great Longing," and "Of Joys and Passions," which respectively depict the stifling of the spirit by religion, the yearning for spiritual freedom, and the temptations of earthly pleasures. Throughout the first half of the work, C major and his associated sunrise leitmotif appear as fleeting visions of purity and enlightenment, and a disembodied version of the motive is used in the section titled "Of Learning" as the subject of an academic fugue that captures Nietzsche's skepticism of science and its broader implications for humanity. This combination of key and motive is also used to represent spiritual attainment, such as in the climax of The Convalescent, which portrays the hero's breakdown and ultimate recovery, and throughout the following dance song, in which an earthy waltz illustrates his embrace of humanity. Although Nietzsche's novel closes with Zarathustra happily embracing the eternal recurrence and the belief that all joy wants deep eternity, such idealism was alien to Strauss's personality. Instead, he ends the tone poem with alternating B major and C major chords and arpeggios, creating an atmosphere of ambivalence that symbolizes the intellectual and spiritual openness Nietzsche identifies in his novel as essential to our fulfillment. One must still have chaos within oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star.